In an interview published in Empire magazine on October 4th, 2019, Martin Scorsese admitted that he doesn't watch Marvel movies. To him, those films are not cinema. The MCU responded pretty quickly.
Film's a film.
I mean, it plays in theaters.
They're movies. That's what Martin Scorsese makes.
But what's interesting to me is how respectful that pushback has been. More than anything, the response from the MCU has been supportive of Scorsese's work and of his right to his own opinion. Instead of launching 1,000 ships, it seems that Scorsese's comments have opened up a thoughtful discussion over the term cinema. What does it mean? Is it just a fancy douchebag word for movies? Is it a special subset of film that denotes artistic aspirations? And if so, where do we draw the line between cinema and what Scorsese, in a later New York Times op-ed, called worldwide audiovisual entertainment?
To put it another way, what is cinema?
Let's assume that there is a difference between movies and cinema. How do we differentiate between the two?
Talking to me?
To understand Martin Scorsese's perspective on the question, let's look at both the Empire magazine interview and the piece published in the Times a month later.
For me, cinema was about revelation.
We're not going to leave this circle.
Aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual revelation. It was about characters, the complexity of people and their contradictory and sometimes paradoxical natures, the way they can hurt one another and love one another and suddenly come face to face with themselves. Many of the elements that define cinema as I know it are there in the Marvel pictures. What's not there is revelation. It isn't the cinema of human beings trying to convey emotional, psychological experiences to another human being.
In other words, for Scorsese, cinema shows us the lives of others from their point of view. What motivates them? Who are they when the chips are down? Or when there's nobody around to see them? What makes a Travis Bickle, a Henry Hill, or a Jordan Belfort tick? Scorsese uses a variety of techniques to answer these questions.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
The most obvious is his use of voiceover narration, which features pretty heavily in most of his major films.
Here's a man who would not take it anymore. A man who stood up against the scum.
When it's good, it's brilliant.
So I recruited some of my hometown boys.
Crackling with character and chock full of backstory that we wouldn't get as efficiently or entertainingly if it had to be conveyed through the visuals.
And Robbie, who sold anything he could get his hands on. Mostly weed.
Other times it's not so great. The first 45 minutes of Casino has almost no breaks in the voiceover, and frankly, large parts of it are just unnecessary.
This is the end result. Take care of anything. Ginger took care of the Parkers.
Got a lot of holes in it. Cleveland and a lot of people all over the Midwest.
To let her operate.
And they would meet in the back of this produce market in Kansas City.
It seems almost like Scorsese and co-writer Nicholas Pileggi had all this research they'd done for the script and they didn't want to waste it, so they just shoved it into the narration, whether it served the story or not. At the same time, I'm going to give Casino's narration props for pulling off maybe the greatest voiceover misdirection of all time.
Always the dollar.
Scorsese's editing also conveys the inner experiences of his characters. Key events play out from multiple non-contiguous angles, freeze frame, time jumps forward, or slows down. Dissolves signal important shifts in the landscape, both physically and psychologically. Flashbacks can be used effectively, as in The Departed, or lazily, as when Gangs of New York just replays earlier footage with a slight tint.
We were wrong. And you, Rupert, you were right.
Sometimes scenes are edited so that we can't be sure what's real and what's in a character's head.
We'd like to apologize to you personally.
Perhaps the best example is 1983's King of Comedy.
King for a night, then schmuck for a lifetime.
In an early scene, we watch Jerry Langford, played by Jerry Lewis, beg Rupert Pupkin to cover his television show. Rupert refuses, they go back and forth a while, but as the conversation continues, we suddenly cut to Rupert wearing different clothes and obviously in a different location, and we realize that this is all his fantasy. In reality, Rupert's just an awkward loner who lives in his mother's basement.
What are you doing down there so
The more the film progresses, the harder it becomes to separate what's really happening from Rupert's delusions.
That's right.
Don't even get me started on the riddle of Rita's ever-changing hair. For Martin Scorsese, cinema is about understanding people from the inside out.
Ladies and gentlemen,
It's an introverted and individualist approach to the human condition. But is that the only valid perspective for a film that lays claim to the mantle of cinema?
Let's face it, this is not the worst thing you've caught me doing.
The most common counter-argument I've heard is best summed up by Bob Iger in his BBC interview from November 6, 2019.
These are talented people that are putting their hard work and talent in to making films that entertain people in theaters around the world.
I think this argument sidesteps the point, though. I mean, I have a 10-year-old Subaru in my driveway. I know there was a lot of work that went into designing and building and testing it, and it's certainly a feat of engineering. But I don't think it's an insult to the people who put in that work to say that it doesn't qualify as art. So I need something a little heftier than, we worked hard on them, to qualify the Marvel films as cinema. One perspective that I do find interesting comes from actor Paul Rudd.
Well, ultimately, you really care about relationships with people. It isn't all just special effects driven. We're trying to deal with human issues.
Now, Rudd mentions specifically his Ant-Man character's attempts to have a relationship with his daughter, but it got me thinking, what about the group dynamics in the Avengers?
Did we come to your planet and blow stuff up?
Or Civil War? Or the tension between isolation and international cooperation in Black Panther? Ultimately, the Marvel films present an extroverted lens for the question of human existence. Instead of asking, what motivates the individual, these films ask, what is my individual relationship to the group?
So was I.
How do we as a family, team, nation, species navigate our shared existence? Stories that grapple with these questions have been around for millennia. We call them myths.
The pictures are made to satisfy a specific set of demands, and they are designed as variations on a finite number of themes.
In his book, The Story Solution, 23 Actions All Great Heroes Must Take, author Eric Edson writes, "Every movie made is a myth about a hero who confronts staid social customs in an attempt to change them, or who sets out to protect valued ideals in order to preserve them. For anyone who's watched the Avengers save the world or fight to correct their own past mistakes, I think both of these should ring true." Later in the book, Edson explains the importance of the flawed hero, who overcomes wrong-headedness in his relationships with others to discover the truth about who he is.
My name is Carol.
There's something wrong with the way our hero interacts with the world around him.
Volatile, self-obsessed, don't play well with others.
That I did know.
Often an important part of themselves is locked away, and they need it. It's only when they confront that hidden part of their identities, own it, embrace it, and heal themselves, that they can succeed in their external goal of saving or changing the world. They become their truest and best selves, and the world is made better because of it. This concept has undergirded the foundational myths of every human culture. Without these stories, humanity might not have risen at all, or long ago, fizzled out.
It's pretty.
You know what I'm saying?
But is it art?
To me, at least, this all seems to beg a further question. Can myth be art? Does a film's function as myth inherently disqualify it from also being considered cinema? At a time when tentpole franchises are dominating theater screens, making it harder for low and middle budget films to find an audience, these are fair, maybe even important questions. How we answer them will inform our answers to that other question we started this discussion by asking.
And our collective responses to that will likely shape the course of filmmaking for decades to come.
Hey film dorks, Ethan here. I hope you enjoyed this latest video. I think it's the most ambitious thing I've done so far. I'm pretty proud of the result. 2 quick recommendations for you. 1, Motherless Brooklyn. Written, directed, starring Ed Norton as a private eye with Tourette's and obsessive-compulsive disorder in 1950s New York. Fantastic cast, riveting performances, It's not a perfect movie by any means, it does drag in a few spots, but overall, I found the characters and the world so arresting that I wasn't bothered by it. It's definitely worth checking out if it's available anywhere near you. Second of all, if it's not out of cinemas already in your area, go see Jojo Rabbit. I had no idea it was possible to make a film that dealt with Nazi Germany as a farce without trivializing the Holocaust. But Taika Waititi has pulled it off with this one. I laughed, I cried, I left the theater feeling better about the world and the future of film. Anyway, that's it for me. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this video, and I will catch you on the flip side.
You know what I'm saying? Go!